There are two main tools that I want to make sure you are really comfortable with using as we start to move forward with Adobe Illustrator. And those are the Selection tool and the Direct Selection tool. They are the two arrows here on the top of your tool panel. If you hover over it, it says Selection tool, the other says Direct Selection tool. The Selection tool selects entire images. So if I wanted to adjust the scale of this puppy, I would use the Selection tool to click on it, and then I can hover over any of these control points at the corner to adjust the size. If I hover over this one, I adjust the size up and down. Notice as I'm adjusting the scale, the proportions. Notice how as I'm adjusting, the proportions of the image are changing. If I want to keep the proportions the same and not have this tall, skinny puppy, I hold down Shift while I'm dragging, and that locks the proportions in place. So I can come to any of these control points, click and drag, and if I hold down Shift, it locks my proportions in place. Similar to clicking the lock in the Transform menu. So if I come up here where it says Transform, and I click on this, I can be more specific about the size of my image. So here over where it says X and Y, that's where the image is located on my artboard. And I can tell from this that it's using the reference point of the center of this image. These become more useful if you're working in intense graphic design and you really want things precisely placed on the page. What you're more likely to use right now are the width and height tools. So I can come in here and I can adjust the width to be exactly 2 inches. Now notice when I hit enter, it scaled the height to match the width of 2 inches without distorting the proportions of this puppy. That's because I have the lock clicked here that constrains width and height proportions. If I unlock it, and now I change the width to 6 and I hit enter, it distorts the puppy. If I don't like that, I can do Command Z to undo. So the Selection tool allows me to select whole images. I can move my mouse over to the toggle points and adjust an image. I hold down Shift to lock proportions as I drag. And one other thing I want you to notice is if I hover over a corner, I get at first this scale indicator that shows I can move that corner up and down and change the size of the puppy. But if I go out a little bit further, I now get an arc. And what that's telling me is if I click and drag with this, I can rotate the puppy image. If I hold down Shift again, it locks my rotation to 15 degrees. So if I want to turn the puppy an exact 90 degrees, I would hold down Shift as I'm rotating and get it to snap to a 90-degree turn. Or I can let go of Shift and rotate it a bit more subtly. Again, if I don't like it, I can do Command Z to undo. So that is the Selection tool and Transform controls. Now I want to show you the Direct Selection tool. That is the arrow over here. When I hover over it, it says Direct Selection tool. What the Direct Selection tool allows me to do is to select individual points within a shape. So instead of selecting a whole shape, I can come into this puppy. I'm going to zoom in. And notice that I'm now seeing all the individual points on this shape. So there's tons of control points that make up this puppy. I can click on one of these. Now notice that's the only one selected within this shape and the others aren't filled in. So I know that's the one I'm going to be able to control. And now I can click and drag to manipulate it. This shape has curves in it, and the curves have control points as well. So there's the little box that's a control point for a shape, and then there are these lines coming off of it with dots. Watch what happens if I click on one of those dots with the Direct Selection tool and drag. Click, drag, and now I'm adjusting the curve. So I'm not adjusting the point anymore. I'm adjusting the curve coming off of the point. I can still click on that point and move it, and I can give this puppy some weird little lumps. I'm going to Command Z that, and the nice thing about Illustrator is you can hit Command Z as many times as you want and get all the way back to the start of when you open the document. Let's say I wanted to fix this puppy's nose. Well, I'm going to zoom in on it. I'm going to use my direct selection tool. I'm going to click on this point. I don't want that little dot there. I want these control points. That's what I want to be manipulating. I'm just going to soften up this puppy's nose a little bit. I'm going to come to this control point for that curve. Center it a little bit more. And so with the direct selection tool, I can really refine and adjust individual shapes. And make my puppy's nose look a little bit better. The nice thing about vector images is because they're made up of shapes, they can always be adjusted and changed. So remember, selection tool is what you want to be using most of the time to manipulate entire objects. Direct selection tool allows you to manipulate specific parts of objects and readjust them.